Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies, including recent Blu-ray releases here in 2023. So today I'm going to begin my discussions of the films included in this Francois Truffaut collection. I'm going to start with The Wild Child. Now, Kino, at the same time it released this collection, they also released some single releases. The Story of Adele H. Highly recommended. I did a video on this a few weeks ago. And The Bride Wore Black, starring Jean Moreau. Also did a video on that. Last year I did a video on Mississippi Mermaid when Jean-Paul Belmondo died. So I haven't yet upgraded this. This is a really old MGM DVD that starred Belmondo and Catherine Deneuve. So the Kino release of Mississippi Mermaid, plus the other two single releases, all had commentaries on them. But there is absolutely nothing, no extras whatsoever on this for movie release. I saw an interview with with somebody from Kino who explained they just wanted to get these Truffauts out there in Blu-ray. None of these have been available in Blu-ray, at least in recent years in Region A. But and they didn't give them any extras, so I'm assuming they didn't think these particular films would have much interest, and that's really sad because now I've yet to rewatch the other three. But The Wild Child is one of Francois Truffaut's best films, and it certainly would have deserved a special edition of its own. And this is Truffaut and The Wild Child. It's the only extra, the only photo you're going to get from Kino's release. And The Wild Child, it stars a incredible young performer who was not a professional actor, Jean-Pierre Cargol. I think he appeared in one more film, and that was it in his career. He plays the Wild Child, and Truffaut himself in his first appearance as an actor and a lead actor here, he plays Dr. Attard, who takes this wild child under his wing and attempts to educate him. Now, Truffaut had read a book that had come out in the early 60s, which was a collection of real-life stories of what were called feral children, children that had lived on their own in the woods for many years, as did this child. He's around, they estimated his age at around 11 or 12, and they believe he was probably abandoned and perhaps left to die, as there's a scar on his neck, when he was maybe 2 or 3 years old. Somehow survived for 8 years roaming in the woods outside of the town of Aveyron. So he's taken to a hospital facility for deaf and dumb children, which is very poorly organized, and the wild child is suffering from mistreatment. He's seen as a figure of bemusement. He's famous, so the very wealthy people in Paris, this is in Paris, they're brought to just look at him as if he was an animal in a zoo. So Dr. Attard rescues him from this mistreatment and gets the government to finance his efforts to educate this child, and a stipend for a housekeeper to take care of the child. He keeps an elaborate journal, Dr. Attard, and this is a real-life story, and Truffaut is really impressed by his journal. Truffaut always loved books and loved writing and loved people who were articulate, and Dr. Attard really tried hard in the primitive, by modern standards, primitive techniques of trying to educate this boy who cannot speak. Originally, I think he can't hear, but he does hear. But he can't talk, he can't communicate. And this is a film very much about communication and the value of communication and the loss of identity without being able to communicate. He has no name. He's 11 years old, he has no name. And as the housekeeper says, we have to give him a name, and they name him Victor, believing that's a name, and he responds to that name almost immediately. But he has to learn everything for the first time. He has been rambunctious, he's run away, tracked down in the woods. He has been through a lot. But now can he be civilized? And the housekeeper, who is a real life character as well, in fact, the real life Victor went on to live with her for the rest of his life. She provides the maternal love, and he responds to that very much. And Dr. Attard, the Truffaut character, providing the fatherly type instruction. He's trying to get him to see the world around him. He's trying to get him an ability to him to communicate. He can make sounds, but he doesn't seem able to form words. So this is kind of an experiment, but Dr. Attard, who seems rather cold and distant, nevertheless does care a great deal about. He's not just about Victor. He's not just a laboratory experiment, and he wants to teach him not just how to communicate, but he wants to discover whether Victor has a moral dimension. And probably the best scene in the film is when he sets up what appears to be a very cruel experiment in which he is trying to see whether Victor can understand injustice. He does an unjust thing. Will Victor recognize injustice? So the film is shot in a kind of documentary kind of fashion. It seems very real, but it's very stylized as well. We never see things from Victor's point of view. It's always we're the audience gazing at Victor, at his original dilemma, alone in the woods, tracked down by townspeople who have discovered him. His ordeal at the institution, and then his discovery, his constant discoveries. He's discovering things for the first time, how to live with other human beings. So it has very much a documentary feel to it, and one of the motifs of the film is water, because water is the most necessary staple of life, and we see Victor in the early part of the film, drowning himself in drinking water from streams, and he responds to water very much, and that will remind anybody who's familiar with the film The Miracle Worker with Patty Duke and Anne Bancroft, directed by Arthur Penn, where there is a big moment, dramatic moment in that film when she discovers water from the pump, and being able to give a name to it. Now that film it would be a good companion piece to watch with this, but that, as I say, this is a sort of a documentary kind of feel to it. Arthur Penn's film is more or less a very gothic feel to it, with very much heightened emotions, which we do not have here. Francois Truffaut's acting is very calm and very cool, and we nevertheless get to. It becomes a very much a kind of a thriller kind of story, in the sense that we want to see Victor. We even though we're not seeing things from his point of view, we want to see Dr. Attard take this wild child and make him into a human being. Now, the father figure plays a big role in many of Truffaut's films, and you can also link this as the second film in a trilogy. Small Change is on the set, would be the third part, and the first part would have been Truffaut's most famous film, 400 Blows, where Jean-Pierre Léaud, as a young man, playing a figure very similar to Francois Truffaut, and Truffaut guiding Jean-Pierre Léaud through how to be an actor and going on to a long career in films. And I've read recently that he is in very grave physical condition right now, Jean-Pierre Léaud. But it also ties into the father figure of André Bazin, who was a great film critic, and took Francois Truffaut under his wing when he was very young, and he got him to see the world and to see the world around him, to be an observer of the world around him. It also has a kind of relationship as well to this other film, the story of Adele H., who Adele H. is going the other way. She's becoming uncivilized. She's becoming uncommunicative. She cannot understand the reality that she faces in her life. But coming from a very famous father, who she's a temp, Victor Hugo, the famous writer, who at the time that this film is set in was probably the most famous man in the world. She keeps a journal, as does Dr. Attard, but her journal is full of gibberish that nobody can possibly understand. And the film very much, this is the first film that Truffaut made with Nestor Almendros, who would then go on, I think, to photograph 8 more of his films. It's in black and white, and it's just an absolutely gorgeous black and white film. It's a homage to silent films. They use the iris in, the iris out. In fact, Truffaut actually went back to, he thought the iris in and iris out was too mechanical in the modern equipment, and went back and found some old equipment from silent film days that would give the same feel, the same silent film feel of the iris, which was used quite often in silent films. So he's basically going back to the origin of cinema, Truffaut. As many of the new wave filmmakers did. For those of you who follow my channel, you know I'm very much a big admirer of the French New Wave and the directors and the films that they produced. In fact, there is actually even a connection to Jacques Rivette, very close connection to Jacques Rivette, and I've talked about 4 of his films so far this year. As Rivette looked through the script and gave some very useful advice to Truffaut, because the first part of the film was going to be like half the film before he starts to be educated, and Rivette advised Truffaut shorten that up and make the whole emphasis on the education of Victor the Wild Child. So it runs only like about 80 minutes. It's maybe a little bit longer than 80 minutes, so it's a very short film, but it really does. It has a great final scene. It may not have the similar impact as the final scene in the 400 Blows, but it nevertheless, especially when you start to think about it, it nevertheless is going to be, I think, a kind of haunting scene as well of our final appearance of Victor the Wild Child. So next up, I'm going to talk about another film about childhood, which would be the 3rd film in Truffaut's trilogy of childhood, and that's going to be Small Change. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are always welcome. Take care.